Welcome everyone, I'm Susan Anderson and this is Susan's So Creative, where it's only wrong when it doesn't work. Join me today as we unravel some basic confusion concerning sergers or overlock machines, from threading, rethreading, to understanding differential feed and achieving the perfect serger seam. Okay, I'm going to be talking today some generic things about sergers rather than a particular model. Now I am working on a Elna 745. This is a 5-thread machine with differential feed. It's what they refer to as a 2, 3, 4, 5 thread serger. What I mean by that is it can use 2 threads, because I do have a 2-thread converter here. It can use 3 threads, which is your stretchy seam for your knits, 4 threads, which is just one for your wovens, and then the 5th thread over here, which I don't have threaded right now, which is my chain stitch. Is going to give me my widest seam for my heavier wovens, or if I just wanted to use the chain stitch, which is my 5th spool over there, would be like for a sloper when I want a temporary seam, and I can literally just pull it apart by pulling the 2 threads, kind of like the bag of dog food or cat food in my case. So anyway, basic sergers. You have 2 needles and you have 2 loopers. When I'm threading a serger, and you can go by your manual, do have your manual on hand for this, I usually start at the center and work out, because the ones that are on the center are the ones going to be closest to the center. Here on the machine, harder to get to, and it's not going to overlap correctly. So if I do my loopers first, I'm going to do thread 1, then thread 2, then my needles, I'm going to go the opposite way from left to right. I'm going to go right to left. I'm going to go right needle and then left needle, simply because of the way it's just easier to get to. I'm not passing one thread over the other where it doesn't make sense. It's not going to be done correctly. Now, as far as that goes, usually on most sergers that I have seen, you're going to have a diagram layout on the bed of the serger as to how to thread it for each of the different types of stitches that your serger does. This one also does a cover hem, which is nice, but I bought a separate cover machine. We'll do that in another video. But I just wanted to show you how that sets up. Now, you also have a stitch length and a differential feed. And on this machine, I actually have a diagram out of all the different stitches, and it shows me my settings. So all I can do, I do have a knob on the side, so I can change from stitch select 1, which is a 4-thread safety stitch. I could do a 2 thread, so I go to 2, and it now shows me my 2nd set, and so forth. So I can dial up whatever settings that I need for my serger. The other nice thing about the serger that I have here is I also have a pressure for my presser foot. This allows me to work with different weight fabrics and so forth that I need to do or would like to work with, and it allows me to accommodate the pressure. So I'm going to lighten the pressure. In this case, it's set at 5. I'd probably go down to 2 or 3. I'm going to tell you right now, this is probably the biggest secret in all of sergerdom. Threading. Threading, I know. Now, if you're lucky enough to have one of those machines that threads itself, wonderful. Easy to set up, easy to do. If you don't, this is what you're going to run into, and I'm going to show you the secret of how nice this is. I'm just going to loosen the threads down here a little bit. There we go. Okay. And if you break a thread, and oh my gosh, do we break a thread? And usually it's one of the looper threads. The looper threads are down here. This is your upper looper and your lower looper. And usually what happens, and I'm just going to clip it, that lower looper thread gets broken. And you think, oh, that's easy to thread. I'll just come back in here and rethread it and so forth like that. Well, yes and no. Before you rethread, and pop it back through the different, I have a clip here and then it goes through here. Okay. Before I do that, one thing I want to do is I want to take my tweezers and I'm going to slide them underneath my presser foot. Now the reason I'm doing that, okay, just like that. The reason I'm doing that is because that will clear my needles from the way it is wrapped around my lower looper. And this is what happens. When the needle comes down into the machine, okay, I'm just going to drop this down like so. When the needle comes down into the machine, like this, the looper, as you notice, switch back. It's going to come back from this side and come over and go behind those two needles to pick up the needle thread. Might be able to actually show it to you. There, you can actually see right here where the threads are wrapped around the looper. If you were to try to just thread the machine straight out from this point, you'd have the looper thread on top the needle threads and it would be out of sequence and it wouldn't work. It could not make the stitch. So in order to correct that or make it so it will thread correctly, I'm just going to slide my tweezers underneath my presser foot. Of course, I've removed the presser foot and remove those threads off of the looper. Now see, because I hadn't had it cut, it's still there. So I'm going to cut this like so. And now it's safe to go ahead and rethread my looper. I didn't have to unthread anything. Needles are still threaded. Needles are still threaded. The upper looper is still threaded, but I now can thread my lower looper and it will be in the correct sequence for the serger to get the serger or overcast stitch. Show you, it's kind of difficult to do simply because sergers don't work if this front door is not closed. It's a safety procedure that I think is on all machines. Older machines I'm not sure about, but usually on the newer machines it is a safety feature. This door is open, the serger will not operate. So we're going to leave it closed for the moment. I wanted to show you how this is going to cut if I just extend. Now most sergers have a marking to the right here for your seam allowance. Now if you are smart, you can cut your seam allowance on any pattern to 1/4 inch. This includes garments. Make sure the garment fits before you cut the seam allowance down, however. So after you've done that, I can just lay it against the edge here and run my serger, not trim off anything, and I know I will get my seam. And there's my seam. Now, here's another secret. Look how it's stretched out, that seam. There's the fabric straight. Look at that. It's stretched it out. It's not correct. This is when you're going to go to your differential feed. This is true for any knit, and I was sewing across the knit. I'm going to tighten this up to 1.5. All right, and I'm just going to restitch that seam. Now, I am going to cut off the seam allowance this time. Now I'm not stretching it. Far from it. I don't want it to be stretched out. And now my seam is perfectly flat. Now did you notice that when I did cut that off, I am using my knife. I'm going to continue to move the fabric straight back. Don't ever pull to the left. Never do this on a serger. Pull it straight back, and all you're doing is creating a tension. You are not actually pulling it. You're just creating a tension. Then you can pull it around to the front and use the knife to cut it off. You can use scissors, you can use the thread cutter on the side, whatever you happen to have available to you is fine, but if you plan on using the knife, or even if you're just removing the fabric from the machine, always pull it straight back, never to the left. Your knife is this little guy right here. Usually your machine comes with an extra knife because inevitably we forget and we don't remove a needle or a pin and we try to sew over it and the needle cuts it or the knife cuts it. So you always have an extra one. Now, in order to change the seam width, yes, I can move the needles, but I can also move the knife. To do that, I'm just going to push on my knife, turn that down to get it out of the way because my upper knife, or lower knife, actually, that's the upper knife I just removed. This is my lower knife. It's my stationary blade, if you would. This is the part of the blade that moves up and down. My knob over here allows me to change the width, and if you look closely, and I'll zoom in, you can actually see, the lower knife or the stationary knife move in and out. And that's how you change the width. So if you're not getting, if you've got your it looks like your loops are hanging off the edge of your fabric, maybe you don't have enough fabric away so it can't fill the seam. So adjust your knife to the right to give it some more fabric. Always do a couple of tests on fabric, just like you do for embroidery, or you're going to be doing on garment construction and checking the seam and so forth. That way you're always going to check this out ahead of time. So you want to make sure you have enough fabric in your seam to go all the way to where your stitches are formed. Now your stitches are actually formed, you can see it here, your stitches are actually formed, use my scissors, you can see it, actually formed on pins that stick out and underneath the presser foot. See that there? That's where the stitches are actually formed. So they're not formed on the edge of the fabric, they lay on the edge of the fabric. They're formed on the two little pins that are there. That's why if you don't have your knife in the correct position, you're not going to have enough fabric in your seam allowance, and it's going to look like the stitches are hanging off the edge of the fabric, because they are. You cut too much fabric away. That's not unusual. That does happen. So we're going to put this back to normal here. Bring my knife back up. You can always drop your knife out of the way if you prefer to sew that way. I don't, because I find if I get it too far over, then my upper looper, this little guy here, will go right through my fabric. So I always leave my knife in play. That way, if I don't want to cut it, I'm just going to back my fabric slightly to the left, keep it further away from my knife. If I do want to cut it, I put my fabric all further to the right, and I can trim off what I call whiskers always when I'm sewing, and that way I make sure I'm not sticking my upper looper through the seam while I'm sewing, because my knife is going to cut off anything that might be in its way. Okay, and I'm just going to show you just a plain stitch. This is a single layer. There's how the fabric should lay in your seam. Okay, should go all the way to the edge and lay perfectly flat. I don't have any pull up or anything. Now if I wanted to gather this, I can take my differential feet, and there is a gathering foot on some sergers that you can get to that will give you more gathers and allow you to do layers, one layer flat and one layer gathered. I'm just going to adjust the differential feed, and I'm going to take my stitch length to 5, which is my longest one, and this is going to give me gathering. Now, I could have gotten more gathers if I had only used my left needle and not my right and my left needle. And I can go through here And if I pick up my 2 needles, I actually get more gathers. What I like about gathering on the Serger as opposed to on the sewing machine is the fact that it finishes the edge off at the same time, and I don't have to worry about all that raw edge while I'm trying to gather. So it makes it that much easier too. You could also serge over a cord in between the needles if you wanted to, and then use that heavier cord to gather. It's nice when you're doing a reinforced and you've got heavier fabric. This is just a plain cotton, so it works fairly well that way. So I have 2 pieces of fabric here. I'm going to place right sides together. I wanted to show you how to start and end a seam. I'm just going to slide this under because it's a knit. I'm lifting my presser foot. Yes, it would take it, but it's a sweatshirt knit. It would tend to roll it. So by sliding it underneath the presser foot, it's not going to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just sew until I get 1 stitch into the fabric. Now I'm going to lift my presser foot, take my chain that's left over from the previous stitching, and bring that so that it's right in front of the needle. Now I'm just going to lay it down here right along the seam line. Now I'm not going to leave it there permanently. I am going to cut it off, but I wanted to stitch over top of that to lock my seam and trim off the extra. Okay, I'm going to come down here. My fabric ends. I'm going to come to the end of my seam, and I'm going to go 1 stitch off the end. If you have to hand turn the flywheel, go ahead and hand turn the flywheel. 1 stitch off the end, needles are down. I'm going to raise my presser foot. I'm going to slide my fabric straight back. Slide my fabric straight back off the end of my fingers, bring it to the front and flip it toward me. Did you see that? So I slid it straight back, and now I'm going to take the fabric and fold it toward me, basically flipping it over to the opposite side, the side that was against the bed of the machine. I'm now going to put it right in front of the needle, drop my presser foot, and sew without trimming anything off the extra, and then off the edge. That created the lock at the end, and here is my lock at the beginning. So my seams are not going to pull out. Thanks for stopping in today. I hope you picked up some tips from today's video. I'll catch you next time on Susan So Creative, where it's only wrong when it doesn't work.